I just read Steve Hanley's brilliant article on Clean Technica called "A Kia Toyota Would Rather Die Than Adapt." And I'm going to put a link in the description below to the article, which I recommend you go and check out. And I recommend you jump on Clean Technica, as it's one of the best websites on the internet. And Steve Hanley is one of the best writers on the internet, who is doing a phenomenal job. Now, a lot of this video will be taken from that article, but I'm also going to share with you my opinions and insights as well during the video. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Electric Viking. I hope you've had a fantastic day. Great to see you again. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. Really appreciate your support. Now, if this wasn't so ridiculous, I'd be laughing, because the CEO of Toyota has just confirmed my numbers that I put into my most recent Toyota video, talking about how their chance of going bankrupt was extremely high. And I feel like maybe he watched my video, because somehow he's come to the same numerical conclusion that I did in that video. I'll put the video in the link in the description below, but this is kind of wacky and crazy and insane to watch this happening and playing out this way. Now, on the same day that Honda declared their intentions for the EV market worldwide, which I'll paraphrase what Electric said, Honda announced a pathetic electric vehicle ambition. Honda has released more details about its electrification plans, and only one word comes to mind: pathetic. Well, on the same day that happened, Akio Toyoda, the CEO of Toyota, and the grandson of the founder of Toyota, has gone into full frontal assault mode on proposals by the Japanese government to slash carbon emissions from the transportation sector by transitioning to electric vehicles. Now, in addition to being the CEO of Toyota, he is also the chairman of the Japanese Automobile Manufacturers Association, JAMA, which means he has a lot of clout in his home country. He has a significant impact on policies in many countries worldwide. Now, he has claimed within the last 24 hours that going all EV by 2030 would cost Japan 5.5 million jobs, 5.5 million. We'll get to explaining why he comes up with that number later, and 8 million units of lost vehicle output by 2030, which was the exact number that I came up with. Now, the figures he comes to and the things that he says, you've got to listen to this. It's staggeringly crazy, right? At a regular meeting of the Japan Automobile Association, where he was joined by top executives from Honda, Yamaha, and Isuzu, he said that the potentially overzealous green manufacturing goals pushed by Europe-inspired Japanese authorities are unsustainable. In other words, he has no interest in selling vehicles to people in 2030. Listen up. The government aims to slash Japan's greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and reach net carbon neutrality by 2050 by going all EV. However, he believes the roadmap should take into account the reality that Japan's economic lifeblood stems from manufacturing, and it's true. A sudden shift to EVs could undercut Japan's industrial base, so he proposes a wider approach to carbon reduction instead. And I quote, he says, Japan is an export-reliant country. Thus, carbon neutrality is tantamount to an issue of employment for Japan. Some politicians are saying that we need to turn all cars into EVs, or that the manufacturing industry is an outmoded one. But I don't think that is the case. To protect the jobs and lives of Japanese people, I think it is necessary to bring our future in line with our efforts so far. So he said, Japanese automakers produce around 10 million vehicles a year in Japan, about half of which are exported. He cited forecasts projecting that by 2030, domestic plants will still be making 8 million vehicles a year equipped with combustion engines, including hybrids and plug-in hybrids. Once those vehicles are banned, automakers will take a big hit, Toyota said, leaving companies with a tough decision. Either send production of such vehicles overseas or end it entirely. So in other words, he's saying automakers in Japan, they've all come together. He's the president of the association. They've all decided that in 2030, 80% of the vehicles they make will still have an ICE engine in them. They decided that. In 2030, 80% of the vehicles they make will still have an ICE engine in them. Now, he actually quotes this. He says this means that production of more than 8 million units, so he's saying more than 80% of their production will be lost. And the automotive industry in Japan will risk losing the majority of 5.5 million jobs. If they say internal combustion engines are the enemy, we would not be able to produce almost any vehicles. Now, the insane thing about this is the Japanese government has no say whatsoever in the vehicles the rest of the world wants to buy from Japan. How he thinks the Japanese government can somehow magically change the minds of consumers like you and me, or people in wherever they are, China, America, Australia, Canada, the UK, Europe, how he thinks the Japanese government can just somehow change their minds. We're talking about exports here. This is 10 million exports. And he's blaming the Japanese government for the fact that in 2030, 10 million people won't want to buy EVs. I'm not sure how he thinks they can solve this problem for Toyota. Now, just so you get some context here, Toyota is planning at best, at maximum, to have 200 gigawatt hours of battery supply. This is not just from Japan, but globally for their vehicles in 2030. Now, 11 million of their cars now, of course, they sold 11 million cars this year. They're the world's biggest automaker. Now, if they aim to sell 11 million cars in 2030, then that 200 gigawatt hours would cover approximately 3 million vehicles, meaning that 8 million of their vehicles will be ICE powered. And this is in 2030, when, without any question, we all know that battery powered vehicles will be cheaper than ICE-powered vehicles. So they aim to sell 8 million ICE-powered vehicles in 2030 for more money than you'll be able to buy a battery-powered vehicle, which will probably have maybe 50% more range than a current battery-powered vehicle does today, based on where battery trends are going. Now, Toyota argued that the path to carbon neutrality, this is hilarious, should be adapted to each country's conditions. In other words, the fact that the entire world is heating up is irrelevant. You should just do what you can do within your own country, and that's it. More specifically, there should be freedom on which technologies are used to get there, as long as the result is the same, an overall reduction in carbon emissions. And you can't make this stuff up. He says, in achieving carbon neutrality, the enemy is carbon dioxide, not internal combustion. To reduce carbon dioxide emissions, it is necessary to have practical and sustainable initiatives that are in line with different situations in various countries and regions. In other words, he believes that somehow we can decrease carbon emissions to the same level by using hybrids versus we can with a battery-powered vehicle. It's impossible. I don't know how he thinks this is logical. It doesn't make any sense. Now, Toyota says that hybrid vehicles still have significant contributions to make toward carbon neutrality, even though they're equipped with internal combustion engines. And he says that's because hybrids are more affordable than EVs. Now, remember, we're talking about 2030 here. If anyone on this planet really thinks a hybrid vehicle will be more affordable than an EV in 2030, they just have no idea what they're talking about. A hybrid vehicle, right? You need 10,000 additional parts put into an EV to make it a hybrid vehicle. I mean, that's simplifying it massively. But there is literally 10,000 parts in an engine. You're adding the complexity here with adding an EV and a battery and an ICE vehicle together. It's going to cost you way more. You think about it right now, BYD can already sell battery-powered vehicles at the same price as they do their ICE vehicles. And that's why 88% now of their vehicles are battery-powered, right? By 2030, by 2025, the cost to buy a battery-powered vehicle, a pure battery-powered vehicle, will be significantly lower than to buy a hybrid. By 2030, it's game over. It's well and truly game over. Now, remember this on a logical level. The same number of vehicles will be produced even after a full transition to EVs. So this is basically a cry for help from a manufacturer or a series of manufacturers from the Japanese automotive industry that are well behind the curve. Toyota claims that hybrids can be used as a bridge technology that moves the world towards EVs and zero emissions, which will soften the blow to the workers who make parts for engines and transmissions. Now, aside from the fact that, his theories and ideas are irrelevant to what the consumer wants, that bridge technology is utter nonsense and the same rubbish that gets passed around by proponents of unnatural gas. This is what they say. Steve Hanley says on Clean Technica that because it burns cleaner than coal, they call it a bridge fuel to the future, while ignoring the damage done to the land by fracking, the diesel emissions associated with compressing it, and pumping it through thousands of miles of pipelines, and the environmental destruction caused by methane leaks. And you can compare all those things to the petrol gas industry as well. Now, Steve Hanley says on Clean Technica that Akio Toyota is right about one thing. Japan's economy is heavily reliant on exports, extremely heavily. It's common knowledge that manufacturing electric cars requires fewer workers than manufacturing vehicles with internal combustion engines. Fewer parts means fewer workers. It's as simple as that. And it's one of the reasons why, many of the unions around the world, including those in Germany, in the United States, are anti-EV. Now, I'm not anti-union. Don't go and unsubscribe. I'm not going, you're anti-union. I'm not saying that. I'm not. I'm anti-corrupted union. Sure, yes. But unions can be good in some places for sure. Now, this problem doesn't just affect Japan. The global love affair with personal transportation means automobile manufacturing is one of the predominant sources of jobs in many, many countries. And that is one of the reasons why governments subsidize the automotive industry massively all around the world. If you're not aware of this, it's true. The German government gives money to its German manufacturers. The American government gives money to the American manufacturers. This is the same in every country in the world that has an automotive manufacturing company, automotive manufacturing brands, because they know the flow-on effects affect many other people. It's more than assembly line workers. For every job at a factory, at a car factory, there are 6 more among suppliers, salespeople, clerical workers, banks and loan companies, and service operations, to name just a few. Electric cars, with their lower demand for service and repairs, are going to play havoc with service departments at dealerships and with independent repair shops. Akio Toyoda is looking to save his own skin. He chooses to ignore the fact that many scientific studies warn the earth is getting dangerously hot for human beings. He's worried about his salary and the value of his stock options and the value of the Japanese auto market, instead of focusing on the key problem. A lot of people are going to wake up dead over the next decade instead of worrying about the key problem: global heating and the pollution from burning fossil fuels that shortens lifespans. Now, if you don't believe this, check out my video. I'll put it in the description below, talking about how pollution, primarily from vehicles, reduces life expectancy by 2 to 6 years in every country in the world. It does. Now, if it didn't, then obviously fire brigade workers wouldn't be getting cancers at an incredibly higher rate than the general population. Their lifespans are being significantly decreased because the diesel trucks start up in the fire houses, and then, well, what happens? Well, the fire is there, get sick, and their life expectancies are actually far lower than general population, between 10 to 15 years. My sister did a PhD on this recently, showing it's around about 15 years less life expectancy for these shift workers in the fire brigade. Now, during the transition to EVs, there will be jobs lost, and workers need to be protected to some level during this transition. Volkswagen has made fairness to its workers a part of its transition to electric cars. It has set the standard other automakers will be judged by. Now remember, the Japanese auto industry disrupted many others when it first came onto the scene, really in the 70s and the 80s as well, and it took a huge chunk of the automotive industry that before was owned by other companies, American car companies, European car companies, and others. And now the tables have turned and it's about to be disrupted, and it is very fearful. As Steve Hanley writes, Akio Toyoda, you have been weighed in the balance and found wanting. The only constant in life is change, and those who fail or refuse to recognize that fact are doomed to be swept away by the incoming tide of new ideas. You can weep and wail and gnash your teeth while wishing for a return to the good old days, but it won't do you any good. Adapt or die. The choice is yours. There are no guarantees that the world's largest automaker will still be around in 2050, or in my view, even in 2030, as you know from my videos. Effective leaders recognize change and they embrace it. Failed leaders are always looking to the past and are likely to get destroyed by change. So this is the issue with focusing on your internal market issues rather than focusing on global trends and what ultimately the customer wants. The customer is always right. Now, some of you are harping on in the comment section saying, I'm pro-Chinese and the Chinese government are paying me, but I'm not. I'm just pro-facts. I'm telling you the facts as I know them and as I see them. I'm giving you as much information as I can to help you to make an informed decision. That could be selling your Toyota shares and buying BYD shares. That could be selling your Honda shares and buying shares of NIO or Xpeng or Tesla or somebody else. Doesn't matter. The point is here, this channel is about education. The Chinese do not need to make Toyota disappear. Toyota is now making Toyota disappear. Now, at some point, the board of Toyota will get a glimpse of the outside world and they'll remove Akio Toyoda, as it is their only choice to survive. Thanks for watching the channel. I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye-bye.